Grand Theft Auto is a series that hardly needs an introduction. Rockstar's premier franchise is so far-reaching that even people not into video games have at least likely heard of it at some point. It's a series that has transcended its medium for all the right and wrong reasons, becoming synonymous with things like violence, crime, and controversy, but at the same time innovation, meticulous design, sheer outrageousness, and more. The original trilogy left a profound impact on the industry, particularly GTA 3, as its open-world sandbox offered an unprecedented level of freedom and autonomy that redefined how games are played. That freedom would ultimately go on to become the defining hallmark of the entire series. Rockstar would follow up GTA 3 with 2 sequels that expanded upon the formula, and each entry elevated the franchise into legendary status. Like many people, I put a lot of hours into these games when I was growing up, but the only one I ever got round to finishing in its entirety was San Andreas. The rest I dropped at one point or another, largely due to my age and restricted access to them. I've always had the intention of going back to these games eventually, and here we are. I'll be covering the mainline entries, so 3 Vice City and San Andreas in that order. There will be no mention of Liberty City Stories or Vice City Stories or any other game that is not a part of the mainline series. 4 and 5 will receive a separate video in the future. The first entry we're looking at, Grand Theft Auto 3, may very well be the most influential game in the entire series, and indeed one of the most influential games ever made. This is a title that changed the landscape of open-world gaming for years to come, and its impact can still be felt today. Let's find out how and why, but first, some history. In the late 80s, a Scottish man by the name of David Jones founded a video game development company called DMA Design in the Scottish city of Dundee. He would go on to hire a few of his former classmates, and together they created a series of video games to varying degrees of success. Their first major breakthrough came with the release of Lemmings in 1991. That's right, the people who would eventually create GTA made Lemmings. I certainly wasn't expecting that. Anyway, in 1995, DMA Design started working on a new game called Race and Chase, which originally had you control a police officer in pursuit of criminals. Apparently this was considered too boring by the developers, so they changed things to have you control a criminal instead. Nobody wants to be the cop, it's more fun to be bad. Those were the words of Gary Penn, the former creative director at DMA Design, and Race and Chase would be renamed to Grand Theft Auto to reflect this new direction. And so in 1997 the first game in the GTA series was released. Critically it was met with mixed reviews, but commercially it was a success, despite generating all sorts of controversy for its violent content, going as far as prompting discussions in the British House of Lords over banning it. The game had you control one of 8 criminals in locales that were each based on real-life cities in the United States. Those were Liberty City, Vice City, and San Andreas, based on New York, Miami, and San Francisco respectively. It operated from a top-down perspective where you roam about each city and complete missions that had you perform criminal activities for the local crime syndicate. The game contained all sorts of weapons, cars, bikes, a wanted system, etc. that set the foundations for the entire series to follow. It also contains some of that crazy outrageousness. For example, in one of the missions, a guy calls you and says the following: "My brother knows I'm banging his wife, waste the son of a bitch before he finds me." Look, I'm not one to judge or anything, your business is your business, but is this really the most optimal solution? Anyway, one of the most defining aspects of the game was its open-ended structure. Players basically had complete freedom to do whatever they wanted, whether it be mucking about or wreaking carnage, or engaging in one of the many side activities, which garnered a lot of praise. Missions were set up in a non-linear fashion as well, leaving some of them up to the player to complete in whichever order they choose. Ultimately, it was a commercial success, and when money is made, sequels are sure to follow. 2 expansions and GTA 2 were later released in 1999. Around this time, BMG Interactive, the publisher of the GTA series, were acquired by Take-Two Interactive, an American video game holding company. With these new assets, Rockstar Games was formed as a subsidiary of Take-Two, who would go on to acquire DMA Design. This led to some notable staffing changes. The original founders of DMA, including David Jones, would leave the company, and it would instead be headed by Leslie Benzies, a producer who took up the role of lead developer for the series going forward. In the year 2000, the PlayStation 2 was unleashed onto the world, and with this, DMA felt they had the technology to create a full-blown 3D title. Working with the team at Rockstar Games, Grand Theft Auto 3 came to be, released in October of 2001. In the following year, DMA was renamed to Rockstar North, and they haven't looked back since. GTA 3 was a massive success and went on to become one of the best-selling video games of that year. We start the game with a brief cutscene where our silent protagonist Claude is robbing a bank with his girlfriend Catalina and a random man we never learn the name of. In the escape, Catalina betrays them by killing the randomer and shooting Claude, leaving him for dead. He survives, but is arrested. During the prison transfer, the transport vehicle is ambushed, allowing Claude to escape captivity. An explosives expert by the name of 8-Ball helps Claude find shelter and introduces him to Luigi Gottarelli, an associate of the Leone Mafia crime family. Claude starts working for Luigi, who gives him an extremely simple first mission: pick up this girl named Misty and drop her off at Luigi's club. Once the task is complete, this is where the game opens up. A small prompt on the top left of your screen lets you know that you may continue performing missions for Luigi, or you can just wander around Liberty City and do whatever you want. This was the game's single most distinctive aspect, the free roam style of its open world, and how it left things up to the player's discretion. It was a natural follow-up to what was established in GTA 1 and 2, but the biggest limiting factor of those games was the top-down perspective, as there were fundamental restrictions in what you could do with it. By taking that concept and shifting it into 3D, GTA 3 provided a level of freedom that had never been done before. The open-ended nature of its core gameplay exploded with quality in 3 dimensions, as there was so much more to it now. The choices seemed endless. You want to be a taxi driver? You can do it. Vigilante police officer? No problem. Paramedic or firefighter? Go ahead. Or maybe you want to use cheats to grant yourself every weapon in the game, or a tank that causes vehicles to explode on contact and bring about utter mayhem. It was all possible in GTA 3, and it was spectacular. Or maybe you just want to drive around and take in the sights. This is a bustling city with seemingly endless possibilities and immense detail everywhere you look. Pedestrians crowd the streets and react to your character, signage all over the world acting as landmarks, a sense of sophisticated realism with how everything is connected, via roads, back alley passageways, an underground system, and bridges. GTA 3 was not the first open-world game ever created, but it was by far the most comprehensive and ambitious in its day. This is a world that responds to your actions in logical ways. Injured civilians and ambulances will appear, break the law and police vehicles will pursue you, rain down hell with your flamethrower and firefighters will arrive at the scene. This even extends to your actions in the wider game world as well. GTA 3 has you work for various different factions, and as you progress through the story, you end up clashing with a bunch of rival factions. As a result, certain parts of the city become much more dangerous over time as you build up a reputation for yourself and make enemies left, right, and center. There were many moments where I couldn't help but feel impressed with the game's world even today. There's a sense of immersion here that was difficult to find in games of that time, and it just served to elevate GTA 3 even further. The game does a good job communicating the rules of the world as well, and these elements continue with every subsequent entry in the series. Most if not all vehicles within your reach can be seized by the player unless they're locked. Performing criminal acts in quick succession will give you a wanted level, represented by the number of stars on the top right of your screen. The more stars you accumulate, the more powerful forms of law enforcement will pursue you. Get arrested and you will be busted, where you lose all your weapons and respawn at the nearest police department. The best way to reduce your wanted level is to drive into a pay and spray garage that will repair your vehicle and give it a paint job in the process. If your health depletes, you will be wasted, where you lose all your weapons and respawn at the nearest hospital. After playing the game just once, these things will be etched into your mind and you will never forget them, acting as the foundations for every 3D entry in the series. They are easy to understand and follow, which I think was a wise choice for a game as expansive as this one. Liberty City is broken up into 3 islands: Portland, Staunton, and Shoreside Vale. The game opens up even more when you reach Staunton, and it doesn't take too long to get there. This is a very short game by modern GTA standards, with a total of around 70 missions, around 50 of which belong to the main narrative. You can finish the story in less than 8 hours if you're dedicated enough. Hope you know where you're going though, because this game doesn't have a built-in map function. The mini-map is all you get, and the only form of guidance are these tiny squares, indicating the location of your destination. You're never given a specific route to follow, so it's up to you on how you get there. The lack of a world map is both a good and bad thing. Good because it forces you to recognize and remember landmarks, which is rather immersive and allows you to appreciate the detail. Bad because it's easy to get lost, especially when you need to travel between islands. Since you're not given a specific route to follow, you can end up driving in the opposite direction you need to with how the islands are connected, which is particularly true for the third island, and for missions that must be completed within a time frame, this becomes a bit of a problem. Portland, the first island, is basically one big tutorial area. The missions here are extremely simple and straightforward, all in service of teaching you the basics of the game, which it does fairly well. Staunton is where things get much more creative, largely due to an increase in just about everything: more weapons, vehicles, characters, mission providers, and so on and so forth. Shoreside Vale feels more like an extension to Staunton as opposed to a completely different island, like how Staunton feels to Portland. It's slightly more rural than the previous 2 areas, with an airport taking up about 50% of it. Missions in this game are given to you by various people, and there is some decent variety to them, although pretty much every single one involves driving and/or killing people in some fashion. Occasionally you are granted some freedom in how you complete objectives. Most of the time you're given a specific set of instructions or a particular weapon to use, but sometimes the missions will give you a broad objective, like kill X, and how you go about that is for you to decide to a degree. For example, I was having a bit of trouble with this one mission where you have to kill Salvatore Leone. Taking him out with my car wasn't proving to be a fruitful endeavor, so I changed up my approach and used a sniper rifle to kill him from afar. Experimenting does pay off in some instances, and coming up with your own way to complete objectives is satisfying when it's possible. The linearity of Rockstar missions clashing with their open world design is well documented at this point, so I'm not going to bother going over it, at least not yet. You do have some say when it comes to what order you complete missions in, as you're introduced to a bunch of characters throughout the story, and the free roam design of the world lets you choose who's to complete first. There were some missions I remember being stuck on for hours upon hours as a kid, like Espresso to Go, where you have to drive around every island and take out these stalls belonging to the cartel. Or how about Bomb the Base, the sniper mission where you have to take out enemies on this shipping liner. You have to be quick about it so that 8-Ball can work his magic and blow the ship up. I also remember hating this mission SAM, where you must head to some docks, get in a boat, drive out to a certain area, and then wait for a plane to fly over you before shooting it down with a rocket launcher. The window of opportunity you're given is very tight, and unfortunately, that is a common occurrence in this game. GTA 3's missions are decent, but they don't even come close to matching the quality of those found in its sequels. Most of them are hampered by the game's inherent limitations, and we'll talk about those shortcomings in just a bit. I seem to recall the shooting mechanics being quite good, but nowadays they are lacking in key areas. There are no hit markers, so it's kind of hard to tell if you're actually dealing any damage, and most weapons can only be fired from a standstill, leaving you wide open. There's also an abundance of cheap enemy placement, and it is aggravating getting blindsided or surprised by an enemy in a highly dubious location. The selection of weapons on offer is basic, but it covers just about everything you will need. It's standard stuff. You got a pistol, shotgun, AK, M16, a sniper rifle, etc., totaling to 13 weapons. Obviously, each weapon has its strengths and weaknesses, depending on the situation, but overall, I'd say the best one is the M16, as it has great range, firing rate, and very high damage. It's a bit difficult to come by though, so it must be used with care. There were some things that really took me back to my early days here, like going out of my way to secure the Banshee from the car dealership on the first island. And just like before, I would save it in my safe house and then never use it out of fear of losing it. I would always wait for another one to spawn and use that instead. The Banshee is by far and away the best vehicle on the first island. Every other one is pretty shit, honestly. You can only find good cars driving on the road in Staunton. Portland is rather limited in its selection. The handling on the ground vehicles is super smooth. They feel responsive in all the right ways, and each one possesses noticeably differing attributes. There's a fairly small selection of vehicles by GTA standards of today, but still enough to offer some okay variety. Another thing that took me back was trying to drive normally. You play as a criminal, so the way to be a renegade is to obey the law and follow the highway code. I'm pretty sure that everyone who has played these games has at least tried this at some point or another. Of course, one of the very best things that comes with the driving, and this series in general, are the radio stations. There is always a great selection of commercial music in these games, but GTA 3's soundtrack is primarily made up of original creations from the Rockstar team themselves, with a lot of help from actual artists, of course. Still, nothing quite compares to the talk shows and the utterly ridiculous advertisements. Every single one is extremely over the top, exaggerating marketing cliches and tropes found in real life to amazing effect.
Now, 10 minutes of music guaranteed. As soon as you wait through another 9 minutes of messages from our sponsors. Lips 106.
I'm a marketing manager who lives in the suburbs and commutes to work on the highway. I live alone, so of course I needed a car that could seat 12 and is equipped to drive across Arctic tundra. It just makes me feel better.
The new Maibatsu monstrosity. Mine is bigger.
How about the DJ at Head Radio named Michael Hunt, Call Me Mike? Okay. Or Fernando's New Beginnings by Fernando Martinez, advertising a method of saving stale marriages by letting the husband use the services of a mistress. It's just absurd. The tropes continue with the talk shows. All sorts of crazy people phone in and give their opinion on this, that, and whatever, and it's good for a laugh. This leads me on to my personal favorite thing about this series as a whole, and that's the social commentary that comes with each game. Whether it's satire or parody, GTA takes just about everything to the extreme, and it is greatly entertaining. Is there a deeper meaning to it all? I'm not sure. That's open to interpretation. But for comedic value and sheer cleverness, it's fantastic stuff. As a kid, I played this game for one reason, to muck about in its world, and there is a large contingent of people who do just that even to this day. Looking back, I was far too young to be playing this, and I know I wasn't the only one to do so. Raising my wanted level and seeing how long I could go without the police catching me was super fun. The police in this game are relentless, and their primary method of stopping you involves ramming into your vehicle with theirs, even at their fellow officers' expense. The chaos that ensued was insane, and it just got worse and worse every time your wanted level increased, culminating in military vehicles being deployed to stop you at 6 stars. The spectacle of it all was so much fun, I couldn't get enough of it. During missions, however, it's a bit of a pain in the ass. For a game released in 2001, it's not surprising to see that some things have not aged well, especially considering that GTA 3 was cutting edge at the time. Still, I encountered quite a few frustrating elements. I already mentioned things like the cheap enemy placement and the issues with shooting, but there's some other stuff as well. I want to highlight these things to show how the sequels improve on them. Earlier I brought up how certain parts of the world become more dangerous as you work through the story. Well, by the end of the game, you are being shot at by what feels like everyone and their mother. The cartel, Yardies, Diablos, Leone family, and the Triads all become hostile to you, and if you take so much as one step into their territory, a rain of bullets is sure to follow. Because of this, you ideally want to complete as many side missions as you can before proceeding with the main narrative, just to make your life easier in these locations. It's also imperative that you max out on body armor before every mission, particularly once you get to Staunton, because otherwise you die way too easily. Speaking of which, vehicles in this game are very sensitive, take too much damage and they will light on fire, meaning an explosion is imminent and you need to leg it, but the timer on the explosion can be accelerated significantly with more damage, leaving you unable to react to it in some cases. Because you respawn at either the hospital or police department whenever you get wasted or busted respectively, you have to physically drive back to the mission provider, but you also lose all your weapons, so yet another trip to ammunition is required as well. Hope you remember where the stores are located because the icon doesn't appear on the minimap. I would not be surprised if the one in Staunton was surviving off of my purchases alone. I had to refill my weapon supply here so many times. To go into any mission besides the first few without weapons is a fool's errand. They are essential. At the very least, I never ever found myself in a position where I didn't have enough funds to purchase them. GTA 3 rewards the player with an obscene amount of money for completing missions, specifically the main story ones, and it offers a lot of opportunities to make money through side hustles, but since there's nothing to spend it on besides weapons, it wasn't long before I was rolling in cash. By the time I got to the second island, I had well over $300,000. It's definitely excessive, and is something the developers address in Vice City and San Andreas. You do need $500,000 to initiate the final mission, but as I say, it's not hard to accumulate money. Then there's the physics engine, which is a little unpredictable. I guess I can't be too critical due to its age, but if you run down a set of stairs, for some reason you fly off the edge at around its midway point, which honestly contributed to most of my deaths, and it wasn't a fun time. I don't think GTA 3 is too difficult or anything, but there is a lot of trial and error to some of these missions, and the game is often quite strict and a bit vague at times. There's this mission called a drop in the ocean, where you have to use a boat to pick up a set of packages that are being dropped off into the ocean via a plane. You're given a 2-minute timer as soon as the mission starts, but is that how long you have to complete the mission, or how quickly you need to get to the boat? What the timer actually represents is how long it takes before the plane starts dropping off the packages. Unless you've gone out of your way to drive around in a boat outside of missions, you haven't been given many opportunities to do so at this point, and once the plane is in range you have 1 minute to collect all the packages before the police get there and the mission immediately fails. Boats do not have good handling in this game. It takes some time to get used to them, so when I'm suddenly told to complete a mission on a boat within a strict time frame, it's quite punishing. I failed this mission twice, once because my character flew off a set of stairs into the ocean, and a second time because I did not position my boat properly. But the only way to know how you're meant to position your boat is by attempting the mission in the first place. Now I have to get rid of a 5-star wanted level before I do anything else. It's the same problem I have with the mission SAM. You only have one chance to pull it off. There are no checkpoints in the original version of GTA 3, and the constant need to physically drive back to the mission provider becomes very tedious very quickly. Finally, we have the main narrative. Now, GTA 3's story is nothing grand or epic, but it gets the job done, and for a 2001 release is not bad at all. So we take control of Claude, who was betrayed by his girlfriend Catalina, and starts working for Luigi. In short time, Claude is introduced to Joey Leone and Tony Cipriani, who give him various missions that pit him against the Triads and the Forelli crime family. After proving his worth, Claude is introduced to the head of the Leone family, Salvatore, and starts working for him as well. He has Claude perform a job for his trophy wife Maria, and saves her from a drug raid on a warehouse party, earning her trust. Salvatore reckons there's a rat in the family and has Claude follow a bartender named Curly Bob, who he reckons is selling information to the cartel in exchange for a drug named Spank. After following him, it's revealed that Curly Bob is indeed selling information to the cartel, and their leaders are Catalina and this guy named Miguel, who acted as the getaway driver for the bank heist in the opening cutscene. For his last mission, Salvatore asks Claude to dispose of a car where a murder took place. Just before he reaches the vehicle, though, Maria calls him and tells him it's a trap and to meet her at the docks. Apparently, Maria told Salvatore that she and Claude were having an affair, which is why he suddenly wants to kill him. Maria introduces Claude to a Yakuza leader named Asuka, and they make their way to Staunton Island to escape. Asuka asks Claude to prove that his ties with the Leones are completely broken by assassinating Salvatore. Once this is done, she introduces him to her brother Kenji and a corrupt police officer named Ray Machowski. Through Ray, Claude is introduced to Donald Love, a multi-billionaire media mogul who has him start a gang war between the Yakuza and the cartel by killing Kenji with a cartel vehicle, all to lower the real estate price of the city. Claude's involvement with the cartel has him run into Miguel and Catalina at a construction site, and he holds them at gunpoint. Miguel attempts to negotiate with Claude, but is shot in the back by Catalina, who makes her escape. Thinking that the cartel killed her brother, Asuka arrives to assist Claude and tortures Miguel for information. When you head back to Donald Love's penthouse, he has randomly disappeared and we never hear from him again. After returning to the construction site, Claude finds Asuka and Miguel are both dead, with a note from Catalina saying she has kidnapped Maria and demands that he bring $500,000 to the cartel mansion to free her. Claude is ambushed at the mansion and Catalina takes Maria away in a helicopter. Claude follows them, massacres an ungodly amount of cartel members, shoots down the helicopter killing Catalina, and saves Maria. Afterwards, the two leave the area, and the last thing we hear is a gunshot as the screen fades to black. It's not clear whether he shoots her or not, but either way, the credits start rolling. So yeah, a very basic narrative. I mean, there isn't too much going on here at all. Claude slowly works his way up through the criminal underworld by getting involved with a bunch of different groups, and in the end he enacts revenge on Catalina. There's next to nothing in the way of character development, and only some small instances of world building here and there. Some of the characterization is quite good though. Donald Love's calm, composed nature combined with his sly, underhanded business acumen makes for an interesting figure. Tony Cipriani is also quite entertaining. He calls up the talk show radio station and complains about his mother, who is constantly giving him shit for failing to live up to her expectations, and it's amusing listening to him threaten the radio host.
Angry. It's my mom. She don't think I'm a real man. Can you imagine that? I mean, I do a man's job and all, but she treats me like a little boy. All I get is, your pa this and your pa that, and you ain't a real man, Tony, and it's driving me freaking nuts.
Well, Tony...
Tony? How'd you know my name was Tony? You're tracing this call? Because if you are, you're gonna get real intimately acquainted with what your brains look like. My name ain't Tony, okay?
Okay.
But my mom, she keeps going, Tony, Tony, be a real man, stand up for yourself, don't take no shit. But all I do is...
With that said, I think a bit more information on Catalina would have helped here. We learn absolutely nothing about her, and it feels a bit off. Apparently the reason why Claude doesn't speak is because Rockstar felt they had other things to worry about during development. Honestly, with a plot as simple as this one, along with the time of its release, I don't mind that we take control of a mute here. There are all sorts of benefits and drawbacks to a silent protagonist, but for GTA 3 it doesn't feel like a big issue. Still, for a 2001 game, most of the voice acting holds up well, with a few questionable line deliveries here and there. They got some pretty big names to do the voice work, like Frank Vincent and Joe Pantoliano. It's an impressive effort for their first title with proper voice acting, and it definitely paid off. Usually I like to mention the graphics in these videos, but... well, I think the visuals speak for themselves. There's no point being critical given the time of its release, and I remember thinking these graphics were incredible as a kid, so yeah. GTA 3 is pretty dark and dingy. Liberty City exudes a certain grittiness, and it fits well with the game's direction. In today's age, Grand Theft Auto 3 is really rather basic. This game has not aged well, but in 2001 it was nothing short of groundbreaking. It set new standards for not just open world gaming, but gaming in general, leading the way for the creation of mature video games. Even with all of its satirical and parody-filled content, it was proof that the medium was fully capable of exploring serious themes and ideas. Of course, it was far from the only mature game of its time, but its success made the world stand up and notice. We have an awful lot to thank Rockstar North and GTA 3 for, one of those things being its sequel. Just 1 year after the release of Grand Theft Auto 3, Rockstar North would give the world Grand Theft Auto Vice City. It was an extremely quick turnaround for such an expansive type of game, with the estimated development time lasting a measly 9 months. Well, turns out Vice City started off as a mission pack for GTA 3 that would bring with it additional content such as new weapons, vehicles, missions, and anything else the developers wanted to include in that game but had not been able to. In short time, they realized there was too much stuff for just a mission pack and decided to take all those ideas and create a brand new standalone game. And so in October of 2002, Vice City was released. Like its predecessor, it was met with critical acclaim and generated all sorts of controversy. It became the best-selling video game of that year, expanding upon everything established in GTA 3 and raising the bar even further for the series. Like the previous title, I have a lot of memories with Vice City, the biggest of which is just cruising downtown and jamming out to the radio music in this vastly different world. It was like the developers pulled a complete 180 with the game's visual direction. Here we had a bright, vivid setting with neon lights, sun, sand, and beaches. It was the complete inverse of Liberty City and the darker atmosphere it brought. On top of that, we now had bikes to ride, a hugely expanded array of weapons, and a story that was far more engaging. The differences were mesmerizing, but at its core, it was still Grand Theft Auto as I knew and loved in all its glory. It didn't just feel like a worthy successor, it felt every bit as special as GTA 3, and perhaps even a little more so. In the opening moments of the game, we learn that our protagonist, Tommy Vercetti, has been released from prison after serving a 15-year sentence. His boss, Sonny Forelli, the don of the Liberty City-based Forelli crime family, sends Tommy to Vice City to establish a drug trade business there. Tommy meets up with a lawyer called Ken Rosenberg, who organizes a drug deal between the Forellis and Lance and Victor Vance. The meeting is ambushed by hitmen who kill the two Forelli associates and Victor, causing Tommy, Ken, and Lance to abandon the drugs and the money. Tommy promises Sonny that he will find and punish the people responsible for the ambush, kicking off the plot. The game starts right after the attack. Rosenberg drops Tommy outside his office, and straight away one of the most exciting things about Vice City becomes apparent. We now have a selection of motorbikes to ride. Our first taste of it comes with this shitty scooter, of course, but it's something that instantly makes Vice City stand out on its own. There are 7 bikes in total if you count the Pizza Boy, including a dirt bike and something akin to a Harley Davidson, but nothing compares to the PCJ 600. It didn't matter what other vehicle I was driving. If I saw a PCJ, I would stop what I was doing and claim it for myself every single time, and I couldn't resist the urge on this playthrough either. It has great speed and is really fun to use when turning corners with the handbrake. You do have to be careful with the bikes though, because hitting anything at a high speed will propel your character off the front. It takes a bit of adjusting to get used to. But it goes beyond just a new set of vehicles. The addition of bikes means the design of the world has to accommodate them. As such, there are so many small passageways and shortcuts intersecting buildings, allowing you to weave through on your bike. It really highlights how intricate and well connected this cityscape is. There's a sense of reward when you become familiar with the lay of the land, which was true for GTA 3 as well, but there are more opportunities to mix up your pathing here, allowing for some fun improvisation at times. This isn't the only new feature introduced in Vice City, far from it, and the game establishes most of its new elements in the first few missions. But before even getting there, the most striking and obvious thing is the larger color palette. Vice City is a vibrant and flamboyant setting, based almost entirely on the city of Miami. Whereas GTA 3 was set in 2001, this game is set in 1986, a time when an explosion of bold colors, pastel suits, and elaborate hairstyles dominated the latest fashion trends, due in large part to the success of Miami Vice, which naturally was a major influence on this game as well. Everything from the buildings, to the weather, to the vehicles, to characters' clothing, even the language they use, it's all notably more exuberant, and it gives the game loads of personality, as well as a distinct stylistic direction. But as I say, the first few missions is where the game shows off a lot of its new features, and most of them serve to address issues present in the previous game. With certain guns you can now enter this first-person aiming mode, allowing for much greater precision. You can also crouch to increase your accuracy even further, or hide yourself from oncoming fire. If you get wasted or busted whilst on a mission, a taxi appears outside the building taking you straight back to the mission provider, which is great, but you'll still need to head to an ammunition to refill your weapon supply. Nevertheless, I appreciate this addition. GTA 3 had a total of 13 weapons, but Vice City has 35. Weapons are now split into categories, so you have 2 types of sniper rifles, 4 types of submachine guns, 10 different melee weapons, and so on and so forth. This brings some much needed variety, and naturally each weapon comes with their own attributes. You can only hold one type of weapon per category, but that limitation is something I think benefits more than hinders. All this stuff feels like a natural progression, and are welcome changes that make the game more dynamic. Stairs are no longer death traps when running down them now as well, and thank God for that. There are almost double the amount of vehicles from GTA 3, a lot of which are familiar. I'm glad to see the return of the Banshee and the Infernus, and this time you have access to them right from the start. This game introduces helicopters, some more RC vehicles, and a lot more boats to pilot. Maritime vehicles are very prominent here, as the setting and overall vibe of the game complements their inclusion, and thankfully their handling has been improved significantly. Vice City is made up of 2 large islands and 3 smaller islands in between. We start on the eastern island named Vice City Beach, and it doesn't take long before we reach the western island, the Vice City mainland. Earlier I described Shoreside Vale as an extension of Staunton, as opposed to Staunton feeling like a different island to Portland, and it's the same thing here. The Vice City mainland feels like an extension to Vice City Beach, with the 3 smaller islands acting as appropriate add-ons. There's a greater feeling of cohesiveness about Vice City. This game gives you a map you can access from the menu screen, which is great, but I only realized this was here after I finished the game. It is proof that you do not need it, but more importantly it highlights how much the design of the world has improved. I never once got lost or found myself driving in circles at any point, and I cannot say the same for GTA 3. I should mention that the 2 major islands are a lot more vertical than Liberty Cities, so it's a bit difficult for me to gauge if there is more landmass, which may have played a part in that feeling of cohesion. Vice City also introduces explorable interiors. You can now enter buildings that are separated from the world via a loading screen. Again, this feels like a natural progression, and goes some way in making the world more expansive. Fundamentally, the game is very similar to its predecessor, still operating under a free roam style, and again there's nothing stopping you from just mucking about and wreaking carnage. The police feel more aggressive than ever, and this time they have stingers that pop the tires of your vehicle. It completely annihilates the handling, which is never a fun time, although it is something you can use to your advantage by shooting the tires of opposing vehicles. Vice City's mission variety is a big step up from the previous game. They still mostly come down to driving and/or shooting people, but on a much larger scale. GTA 3 starts off quite slowly, but Vice City fires on all cylinders from the start. In short time, we're changing outfits to suit the mission requirements, smashing up vehicles to intimidate jurors, testing out some of the new melee weapons, including golf clubs, hammers, and a fucking chainsaw. We chase down enemies on bikes and shoot at them whilst riding. We steal a boat, and then a tank. We take over a Gatling gun attached to a helicopter and massacre a horde of goons, all to the sound of some groovy 80s music. Vice City goes big in its opening. The spectacle of it all eclipses the entirety of GTA 3, and we're only a few hours into it at this point. Missions are a hell of a lot more action-focused in this game, and they're also just more involved altogether. A good example of this is the mission Copland, where you have to plant a bomb inside a mall. You do this under the guise of police officers by first getting a wanted level and drawing the cops into this garage, allowing you to steal their uniforms. After the bomb goes off, you have to shake the police and make a quick getaway. It's engaging with its use of multiple parts, and this standard is consistent throughout the adventure. Personally, I found the game easier than the previous one, and a large part of that comes off the back of playing GTA 3 right before this. All the things I learnt there, like saving and obtaining armor before each mission, I naturally applied here, and the entire experience was smoother for it. The quality of life changes, especially stuff like the first-person aiming mode, played a big hand in that as well. Still, there are some frustrating missions, the most infamous of which being Demolition Man, where you have to use this RC helicopter to drop bombs around a construction site. Piloting this thing effectively is 90% of the battle, as the drop-off points are divided into 4 separate floors, so you're constantly flying up, down, and all around with these shit controls. The construction site is also home to workers and police officers who chase after and even shoot the helicopter, so you have to be careful that it doesn't explode. I remember being stuck on this mission for days as a kid, but this time I finished it on my second attempt. There's a few of these RC missions, and they're a good mix-up to the usual stuff. They don't control quite as bad as I recall, but it's still not the most graceful thing going. There's also this one mission called Messing with the Man, probably the hardest in the game, where you have to go out into the world and fill up this chaos meter. The most reliable way of doing this is by killing people and blowing shit up, but you're only given 2 minutes to do so, and the nature of the mission means that the police will hunt you down and try to kill you. It's a real pain in the ass because every time you die, you lose all your weapons and whatnot. So I ended up using cheats for this one. Even with them though, I just barely scraped by. More variety can be found out in the world. You still have the standard vehicle missions like vigilante, taxi driver, etc., and even stuff like pizza deliveries this time, but some of the more interesting variety is found through assets. This is one of the most significant additions to Vice City, the ability to buy and own property, which is divided into 2 categories, safe houses and assets. Safe houses are residential premises that provide a save point and vehicle storage, which can be really convenient to have in some instances. Assets are businesses that each come with their own set of missions. Initially, this appears to be a bit of side content you can do if you so choose, but in actuality, it is a mandatory requirement if you want to finish the game. Vice City does something unique with its narrative structure. You're going through the game normally, and then after a certain point, missions stop appearing on your minimap with no indication as to why. In order to unlock the final 2 missions in the story, you have to own a minimum of 6 asset properties, one of which must be the Printworks, and complete their respective missions. Once you do this, the business will start generating a daily profit, which you can recoup by walking into this icon. There's a total of 10 asset properties available, including the Vassetti estate, but Phil Cassidy's missions do not count towards the 6 needed, leaving you with 8 options to pursue. Thing is, these businesses are costly, with the cheapest at $10,000 and the most expensive at $120,000. This game dials back on the amount of money it rewards in story missions big time. You don't earn nearly as much as you do in GTA 3. The daily profit that these businesses generate is capped at a different amount for each one. The more expensive they are, the more profit they earn, which can range from $2,000 to $10,000. This means the final act of Vice City requires a bit of honest-to-God grinding. You have to make money, buy businesses, complete their missions, earn the profits, and then repeat the process until you fulfill the quota necessary to continue the story. This is why I never finished the game all those years ago. I didn't realize you had to do this. It's something that the game sort of nudges you to do. If you pay attention to the dialogue, it is easy enough to pick up on, but I think it would be far better off if things were a bit more explicit, specifically in emphasizing that this is a compulsory requirement. Like GTA 3, Vice City can be a little vague at times, and this part of the game is the worst offender by far. So there are 8 asset properties to potentially invest in, and you're completely free to choose which ones to go for. Let's say you buy the pole position strip club. There is no mission indicator here and nothing that informs you how to get the business to generate a profit. Turns out all you need to do is enjoy a private dance in one of the back rooms. You need to spend $300, which amounts to about 5 minutes of viewing time, and only then will the place start earning money. You don't need to complete this one specifically, but my point is, how are you possibly meant to know what to do here? Another example is the Sunshine Autos Import Garage. When you buy this place, there is a mission indicator which allows you to participate in various races, all of which are super fun, I will say, especially the last one which has you tour around the entire city. It's one of the best ways to earn a lot of money quickly in the late game, but it's not how you generate a profit for the business. What you actually need to do is check out this list of cars and bring each type back to the garage and into this specific room. Only then will the place start earning money, but again, the game doesn't make this clear. The rest of the asset properties have standard mission indicators, so things are not as vague, except for maybe the boatyard. You have to get into the boat to start the mission, and although the game doesn't tell you this, it's easy to figure out on your own. I mean, you've just bought a boatyard. The actual missions themselves are quite interesting though. If you purchase the film studio, you end up helping the director shoot and advertise a pornographic film. Buying the Malibu Club has you recruit 3 individuals to form a team and rob a bank, and it's got a great name, the El Banco Corrupto Grande, or the Big Corrupt Bank. That is classic Rockstar. You'd think that buying the taxi business would have you complete fares as normal, but instead you're tasked with destroying 3 cabs from a rival company and then taking out their leader. Then we have the dreaded Cherry Popper Ice Cream Factory, where you go around selling some goods to people from the cover of an ice cream van. This mission can be seriously frustrating, because you need to sell 50 of these goods to complete it, which takes a long time, and the police can bust your ass if you're not careful. The boatyard has you collect packages in a time frame, which I found surprisingly tough. Well, after some research, I discovered the reason I was having such a hard time is because I had the frame limiter disabled. The PC versions of GTA 3, Vice City, and San Andreas have this frame limiter option, and turning it off unlocks the frame rate, making the game smoother and easier on the eyes. Unfortunately, it also kind of breaks the game. These games were not designed to be played at anything above their default frame rate, so if you try to do so, you get some really strange gameplay and graphical oddities. For the boatyard mission, I was failing it by just a hair every time I attempted it, but with the frame limiter on, I completed it with 24 seconds to spare. It's weird stuff like that. San Andreas suffers the worst from this, with unexplainable deaths, broken swimming mechanics, and other annoying shit that drove me mad. So a working PS2 is the best way to play these games, I'd say. Despite some minor annoyances here and there, Vice City didn't frustrate me anywhere near as much as GTA 3 did. Again, a large part of that is because I learnt from my mistakes in that game, but most of the problems I had there are more or less fixed here, so it was a fairly comfortable experience. And that experience was made all the better thanks to the music. Vice City's soundtrack is incredible. As I mentioned previously, most of GTA 3's music is comprised of original creations, but in Vice City the overwhelming majority of songs are licensed. We got amazing tracks here from Toto, Bryan Adams, Michael Jackson, Cutting Crew, and even stuff like Iron Maiden, Twisted Sister, Megadeth, and more. Usually, I prefer listening to the talk shows in these games, given how ridiculous they are, but here I kept the music on non-stop. There's something greatly pleasing about driving through the city in a flashy-looking car, within proximity to the ocean, listening to these tunes. It really is one of the best things about Vice City. Rockstar nailed this soundtrack. There are some familiar names here as well. Fernando Martinez is the DJ for Emotion 98.3, and Laszlo makes a return hosting the talk show station again. The original trilogy does take place in the same universe, or timeline if you will, and it's always fun seeing the crossover in action. Alright, let's talk about the story. So Tommy lands in Vice City, meets up with Ken Rosenberg for a drug deal, but the meet is ambushed and Tommy is tasked with finding out who the culprits are. Ken points Tommy towards Juan Garcia Cortez, a retired army colonel who helped set up the exchange. Tommy meets him on his yacht, and this is where many of the game's characters are introduced, including the local drug baron Ricardo Diaz. Tommy later meets with music industry slimeball Kent Paul, who tells him that a chef named Leo Teal may have some idea where his merchandise is. Tommy confronts Leo and beats him to death before Lance Vance arrives at the scene. Lance is seeking revenge for his brother's murder and starts working with Tommy in the name of mutual self-interest. Tommy works for several eccentric people along his journey, including Texan business tycoon Avery Carrington and Ricardo Diaz, who employs both him and Lance. Eventually, Cortez voices his suspicions that Diaz was the one who organized the ambush, and Lance discovers this to be true. Against Tommy's advice, Lance secretly attempts to assassinate Diaz, but fails and Tommy has to rescue him. With their cover now blown, the two find themselves forced to kill Diaz before he can retaliate. Once this is done, Tommy takes over his assets and works to expand his new criminal empire by forcing businesses to pay him protection money. He does work for a bunch of different groups, including a local biker gang, a metal band named Love Fist, a Haitian gang leader called Auntie Poulet, and Umberto Rubina, the leader of the Cuban street gang at war with the Haitians, all in the hopes they will support his endeavors. During this time, Lance begins to feel underappreciated, causing a rift between him and Tommy. Tommy ends up making connections, buying several businesses, and ultimately gains complete control of Vice City without cutting the Forellis in. In response to this, Sonny sends mobsters to forcefully collect Tommy's business money, which pisses him off and he kills them in retaliation. Sonny then personally travels to Vice City to confront Tommy, where it's revealed that he was the one responsible for Tommy's arrest 15 years prior. It's also here where Lance betrays Tommy by allying himself with the Forellis. Tommy is forced to protect himself and his money by killing Sonny's men, Lance, and then Sonny himself. With all his enemies now dead, Tommy establishes himself as the undisputed crime kingpin of Vice City, ending the game. Vice City's story, while still rather basic, ends up being a lot more memorable than GTA 3's for a few reasons, the biggest of which being Tommy Vercetti himself. We now have a speaking protagonist, voiced by the great Ray Liotta, and he kills it in his performance here. Tommy is a man who oozes charisma and personality. He knows what he wants, how to obtain it, and is never afraid to get his hands dirty or do things himself. He's also a multifaceted character, displaying cruelty and ruthlessness, as well as intellect and patience. He has some great lines and is very self-aware, making for an engaging and extremely likable protagonist.
You know, Ken, I think this could be the beginning of a beautiful business relationship. After all, you're a conniving, backstabbing two-bit thief, and I'm a convicted psychotic killer and drug dealer.
I know. Ain't it just beautiful?
Tommy isn't the only memorable character though. There are all sorts of colourful personalities here that help keep things fresh in the story and in missions. Love Fist is a Scottish heavy metal band, and its members are wild. Their missions mostly involve dealing with an obsessed stalker who plants a bomb in their car, causing them to freak out hysterically. You have to maintain a certain speed in the car whilst they defuse the bomb, and the dialogue is entertaining. Umberto Rubina and the Cubans are constantly going on about Tommy's cojones, and after you finish all his missions, he calls Tommy and tells him that, to them, he is Cuban. It's a nice moment. Avery Carrington is voiced by Burt Reynolds, which is pretty amazing, but his protege is a young Donald Love. There's a line that Avery speaks in this game which Donald Love repeats word for word in GTA 3, and it was really interesting to see.
Tommy, this is Donald Love. Donald, this here is Tommy Vercetti, the latest gunslinger to come to these parts. Now, Donald, you just shut up and listen, and you might learn something. Now, nothing brings down real estate prices quicker than a good old-fashioned gang war. Except maybe a disaster like a biblical plague or something, but that may be going too far in this case. You getting this down, you four-eyed prick?
Nothing drives down real estate prices like a good old-fashioned gang war. Apart from an outbreak of plague. But that might be going too far in this case.
There's great characterization from beginning to end, with one big exception, Sonny Forelli. He barely has any presence in this game. You only see him in a few cutscenes and communicate with him over the phone until the very last mission, so as the primary antagonist, he falls flat. Lance's eventual betrayal doesn't come out of nowhere or anything, but it still stings as he and Tommy had a good thing together. Still, it is mostly Tommy who does the heavy lifting. Lance is often a liability whose behavior flips dramatically over the course of the story. He's shown to be cool and level-headed when we first meet him, but soon becomes emotional, paranoid, and very naive in thinking that Sonny would not betray him at the first opportunity. I feel the world building is an improvement from GTA 3, as things are more tightly connected here, and the game does a good job highlighting its many participants. Through them, there's a lot of commentary on the world itself, making the place a bit more interesting than Liberty City. Both the world and the dialogue are filled with plenty of humor throughout, and Rockstar's comedic style is so ridiculously on the nose that I cannot help but find it amusing. Vice City is pretty much everything I could ever want out of a sequel. The world is bigger and more immersive, there's tons more to do, with improvements to many of its aspects, all of which feel like a natural progression from the last game, combined with a huge cast of characters, a better story, and greater excitement in its mission design. It was fun going back to Vice City, more so than GTA 3. There's no doubt it has aged better than its predecessor. In fact, it may just be the most accessible game in the mainline series. Easy to understand, easy to pick up and play, and great fun from start to finish. It's an impressive achievement considering how much grander it is all round. The jump from 3 to Vice City was and still is spectacular, but it feels like a drop in the ocean compared to the jump from Vice City to its sequel. There is only one word that accurately describes Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. Iconic. This is one of the most iconic video games of all time. Back when it first released in 2004, it felt like everyone was playing this game, as if it took over mainstream media for a time, reaching a pop culture renown that very few titles could ever hope to replicate. It's no surprise then to learn that it was the best-selling video game of that year, and went on to become the all-time best-selling game on the PlayStation 2. The many changes that Vice City brought to the franchise was something to be admired, but San Andreas took things to a completely different level. Rockstar implemented a staggering number of new features that fleshed out the world, offered fresh gameplay experiences, and deepened personalization for the player in several different ways. This comes off the back of an extra year of development time compared to Vice City, which allowed the team to really sink their teeth into many of its aspects and expand upon them to new heights. And the end result was stunning. San Andreas is a huge game. Everything about it completely and utterly dwarfs that of 3 and Vice City combined. Admittedly, now that I've played it again, I feel this is both a good and bad thing, but I'll elaborate on that later. It was more than just a big game though. Here we had a new protagonist, one that was a massive contrast to the previous two in his origins and personality, bringing with it a fresh take on the established formula. Greater emphasis was placed on world building, granting the player a better understanding of the setting and connection to its characters. Many aspects of the game, including its world and story, were heavily influenced by real-life elements, more so than any other entry in the series so far. There was something different about San Andreas, the culmination of GTA's lifetime on the PlayStation 2, and whilst there are certain things I enjoyed more about Vice City, it's hard not to appreciate just how ambitious this title really was. San Andreas is set in 1992 and takes place in the fictional state of San Andreas, based on the west coast of America, specifically sections of California and Nevada. We've gone from the East Coast in GTA 3 to Miami and Vice City, all the way round to the West Coast like things are coming full circle. Our protagonist this time is Carl C.J. Johnson, who's returning to his home of Los Santos after spending 5 years in Liberty City. I would expand a bit more on the game's intro, but San Andreas is by far the most narrative-heavy game in the original trilogy, so I'm going to save it for the end and jump straight into everything else. CJ is dumped in this street, and similar to Vice City's beginnings, we immediately get access to a new vehicle, a BMX this time. In retrospect, the BMX feels like the perfect starting vehicle for this world, not just because it acts as a sort of visual metaphor highlighting CJ's humble roots, but also because San Andreas is a lot more grounded in its overall direction. This game is nowhere near as exuberant as Vice City, and it's evident right from the start. I hesitate to describe the colors as muted, but there's clearly a dramatic tonal shift from its predecessor. This is largely due to the game telling a much more serious story that explores some very heavy themes at times, and takes inspiration from real-life events that took place in Los Angeles in the 90s. There are countless parallels to those events, as well as numerous influences from crime and gangster movies of that time. The setting here, particularly the first area, Los Santos, is integral to the narrative, and a lot of time is spent on world building, explaining the state of things, introducing the various characters and new features. As a result, San Andreas has a slower opening than Vice City. The first few missions are very basic, and the stuff you get up to is not too exciting. The one thing that is exciting, though, is how the scope of gameplay has increased. And not only does this become apparent very quickly, it also just keeps on going the more you play the game. As I said before, San Andreas brings with it a tremendous amount of new features, and a lot of them are personalization options, akin to role-playing. Soon enough you're going to the barber and getting a haircut, changing your clothes to represent your gang, eating at a restaurant to stay healthy, lifting weights at the gym to gain muscle, reduce fat, increase your stamina and learn new fighting techniques, getting girlfriends, which you must maintain a healthy relationship with by taking them out on various dates that suit their preferences. Maybe you want to get tattoos or repaint your vehicle in the auto garage. The list goes on and on. These things are not superfluous add-ons either. They have meaningful effects on various aspects of the game. Going to the gym and gaining muscle influences how much damage CJ deals in melee combat, the amount of respect he commands, and his sex appeal. Eat too much food and CJ will become overweight, affecting his appearance and physical capabilities. He walks, runs, and swims slower. NPCs will also comment on his weight, telling him to go to the gym. Sometimes it even prevents you from initiating missions. But if he has no fat and doesn't eat enough food, he will lose muscle, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. It feels like Rockstar thought of everything, as if no stone was left unturned, and the possibilities were truly endless. There are numerous clothing outlets, and each one has their own set of products. Different barbers offer different haircuts. The gym in Los Santos teaches you basic fighting moves, but the gym in San Fierro teaches you martial arts. Getting a girlfriend is determined by various statistics, including your fat, sex appeal, the style of clothing you wear, and progressing your relationship with some of them comes with extra benefits, like a free paint spray or retaining your weapons after getting wasted or busted. It just keeps going. This isn't even mentioning the huge number of side missions and activities. Just like before, you have the basic vehicle missions like taxi, firefighter, etc., but this time you also have trucker missions, burglaries, freight train deliveries, and even pimping missions. One of my favorite side activities are the vehicle schools, which teach the player various tips and tricks with a type of vehicle: cars, bikes, boats, and planes. They're surprisingly good for educational purposes, but they also come with their own challenges, most of which are fun, and doing well enough in all of them will improve your handling for that vehicle. You can get up to all sorts of stuff here, including shooting challenges, racing, playing basketball, arcade games, gambling. Basically, in this game, if you see something, more often than not, you can participate in it. It was the literal apex of GTA's free roam style. Rockstar had taken everything from 3 and Vice City and expanded upon them to an absurd degree, while simultaneously adding so much optional content that it makes the game feel like something akin to a real-life crime simulator. It was mind-boggling in 2004. There was nothing else like it. The refining of old systems was also part of the equation, and the biggest beneficiary has to be the shooting mechanics, which have improved massively since Vice City. Every weapon can now be aimed with an over-the-shoulder reticle, which does wonders for the player's accuracy. On the PS2 versions there was an auto-aim feature, but I'm playing on the PC, so we get this instead. Unless I missed it or something, I'm not sure. I can't recall how well the auto-aim feature performed on that platform, but this system here is more than a welcome addition. It is miles better than the previous games, and makes combat much more enjoyable. The weapon variety in San Andreas is almost one-to-one the same as what you find in Vice City, with only a few new additions here and there, including, perhaps most famously, a big purple dildo. Honestly, this was just included for comedic effect. It's absolute shite in actual combat. A new feature here is the weapon skill system, which determines the general proficiency of the player with a weapon. There are 3 levels: Poor, Gangster, and Hitman, which are increased by shooting with precision. This will affect stuff like the range, accuracy, and rate of fire with that particular weapon. Skills don't end there though. You also have a driving skill, bike skill, flying skill, and cycling skill, all of which improve the handling of vehicles noticeably when you increase them. The driving feels like it's been improved in general, but I think it's most evident on bikes, as you're less likely to fly off them with a higher skill level, which can be a serious lifesaver in some situations. There's almost double the number of vehicles from Vice City, and a lot of them are quite unexpected. Throughout the course of the game, you are driving and flying all sorts of crazy shit, and the greater variety is again very noticeable. A lot more time is spent in aeronautical vehicles here. There's even one point where the game forces you to pass the pilot school before getting to Las Venturas, as flying is a key part of the missions there. San Andreas is made up of 3 main cities: Los Santos, San Fierro, and Las Venturas, based on Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Las Vegas respectively. Between these cities are 5 different counties, made up of rural areas, towns, and suburbs. This makes San Andreas one of the biggest games in the entire series, and by far the biggest game in the original trilogy. The explorable world really is massive. The 3 cities do not feel like extensions of one another. They are completely different locations, and that was clearly the desired intent. Los Santos is your home and the largest city in the game. Personally, I find it the most grounded of the 3, but that may just be because I'm most familiar with it. San Fierro is the smallest city, but my god is it hilly. There's a lot of up and down to this place, like you would find in San Francisco. Las Venturas is a parody of Las Vegas, and it's definitely the most distinct of the 3 cities, as it's filled to the brim with recognizable landmarks and colorful signage. All 3 cities are very intricate in their design, and offer something a little different to one another, enough to make them stand out. The 5 counties are distinct in their own right as well. We got a desert area, a mountainous area, outback, etc., all of which come with their own vehicles and details that match the location. Certainly this is a very impressive world on a scale that GTA 3 and Vice City could only dream of matching, but that's not always a positive. Once you get to San Fierro and beyond, the game regularly gives you missions that have you drive extremely long distances into the middle of nowhere, and usually the missions end out there, so you have to trek all the way back to the mission provider, and it gets tiring after a while. Now more than ever, it is imperative to save before every single mission, as it cuts down on backtracking if you ever mess up out in the wilderness for whatever reason. I feel San Andreas suffers from pacing issues, which is strange to say because usually the player is the one who dictates the pace in these games, but because the world is so vast combined with the length of the story, things start to drag a bit from the mid-game onwards. Thankfully, the mission variety goes a long way in keeping things fresh, and if you thought Vice City stepped things up, San Andreas offers some of the most exciting missions in the entire series. They don't just come down to driving and/or killing people anymore, although that kind of thing still makes up the bulk of what you do here. There are so many great examples in this game that I can't go over all of them, but I do want to talk about a few. You get up to some fairly basic stuff in Los Santos, which makes sense given that it's the starting zone, but there are some really memorable moments. One of the most famous missions in this game, or infamous, is Wrong Side of the Tracks, where you must ride this motorbike and keep up with a moving train, whilst Big Smoke shoots members of a rival gang. This mission is notorious for how difficult it is, and I remember being stuck on it for hours back in the day. You have to maintain a certain speed and allow Big Smoke to work his magic, but his accuracy is on par with stormtroopers from Star Wars. On this playthrough I finished it first time, no problem. Kinda makes me wonder what the big deal was, but failing it has Big Smoke berate CJ with a memorable line.
All we had to do was follow the damn train, CJ.
And thus, a meme was born. San Andreas spawned quite a lot of memes, including CJ's famous quip at the beginning of the game.
Oh shit, here we go again.
But my favourite by far is when Smoke is ordering food at the drive-thru. I've always loved CJ and Ryder's reaction here.
Hey, I'll take a number 9, fat boy.
Give me a number 9 just like his. Let me get a number 6 with extra dip. I'll have 2 number 9s, a number 9 large, a number 6 with extra dip, a number 7, 2 number 45s, 1 with cheese, and a large soda.
Immediately after Wrong Side of the Tracks, we roll with Smoke again in the mission Just Business, where we have to take out a bunch of Russian mobsters. It ends with a thrilling motorbike getaway with a bit of role reversal. Now the player is the one who must gun people down, while Smoke takes some creative routes to get rid of them. San Andreas introduces stealth mechanics, and I completely forgot about this, so it took me by surprise when I got to the first stealth mission where you rob Mad Dog's mansion. You can perform stealth takedowns with a knife, and even obtain a handgun with a silencer attached. It is fun, if a little basic, but stealth is an option you can take in the world, and missions get progressively more involved throughout the game. There's a great stealth mission in San Fierro where you have to swim, and yes, swimming is a thing in this game, out to a ship under cover of night, take out the crew, and plant a bugging device. You need a certain level of the lung capacity stat in order to initiate it, which may require some training in the ocean. One of the most memorable stealth missions is Black Project, where you infiltrate Area 69 and steal a confidential government secret, which turns out to be a jetpack. After completing the following mission, the jetpack spawns at the airport for the rest of the game, so you can use it at your leisure, and I remember having so much fun with this. It's one of those things that elevated San Andreas to stardom. I'll highlight some more standout missions when I talk about the story in a bit. All in all, San Andreas was a comfortable experience for me, with only a few irritating moments here and there, which was largely the result of the frame limiter being turned off. If you've noticed some footage that looks choppier than others in this video, well, that's because I've been forced to turn the frame limiter on at points. Stuff like the driving and bike schools are good examples of this. They just don't function properly without the frame limiter. Most missions took me 1, 2, maybe 3, and in the most extreme cases 4 attempts. The flying missions often get a lot of stick for being cumbersome, because controlling these vehicles is a bit of a pain, but the only time I had repeated trouble was in the mission where you steal a military jet and engage in dogfighting. Dogfighting in GTA. This is how far the series has come at this point. I will admit that the game doesn't exactly do the player any favors at times, like in the mission Freefall, for example. You have to use a dodo to chase after a private jet. I mean, come on, game. Even some of the more infamous missions, like the stuff you get up to in Zero's RC shop, weren't too bad this time, which I mainly attribute to playing this game right after Vice City and a hefty dose of luck. This mission's supply lines, I still have no idea how to control this thing. San Andreas brings back purchasable properties. Sometimes you must complete a set of missions to unlock the business, or the business will come with a set of missions on their own. Unlike before, this stuff is completely optional, besides the airstrip, and the missions vary in their quality. But the absolute peak of this is in Las Venturas, where you organize a very elaborate plan to rob a casino. This involves stealing blueprints, planting explosives at a dam, seizing police bikes around the city. It's very intricate stuff. One of the more interesting parts of all this is where you have to gain the affection of the casino's croupier so you can swipe her keycard. You can just kill her to get what you need, but otherwise you must make her your girlfriend and take her out on dates and all that. I went with the latter option and I found it very immersive. She's the reason why I changed my outfit here. She won't go out with you unless you're wearing stylish clothing. I wowed her with my dancing skills, and in the end, she wanted a cut of the money from the robbery. It was surprising seeing how much personality she has. Finally getting down to business and robbing the casino is easily one of the best missions in the game. It's a fantastic way to cap off a memorable sequence of events. Things are just altogether more involved, adventurous, complicated, and at times ridiculous here. The shit you get up to after finishing the flight school verges on the insane. We're talking stuff that would not be out of place in James Bond or Mission Impossible. This game's second half is a popcorn spectacle. It's a massive contrast to the grounded and humble beginnings of Los Santos. It is greatly entertaining, don't get me wrong, and it all comes back to Los Santos in the end, but San Andreas ups the ante to a ludicrous degree. Something I will say about missions, though, this is where Rockstar starts holding your hand for the entire journey. This game is constantly providing step-by-step instructions on what to do, and you must follow them to the letter or you will fail. Opportunities for creativity or improvisation are extremely rare, and it's very noticeable here. I can understand why this is the case for a lot of the missions. They're just so wild that they need direction to function properly, but there are plenty of others where the player could have been granted greater agency. As I said before, this is something that has been discussed to hell and back, so I won't dwell on it any longer. Before we move on to the story, there's just one more thing to talk about: the music. San Andreas' soundtrack is incredible, just like Vice City's. The defining station of this game has to be Radio Los Santos, hosted by Julio G, full of West Coast hip-hop and gangster rap. The songs I remember listening to very fondly are Nothing But a G Thing by Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg, as well as Ice Cube's It Was a Good Day. These tracks represent everything I love and remember about San Andreas. It would be remiss of me not to mention Radio X as well though, which introduced me to the likes of Personal Jesus by Depeche Mode and Cult of Personality by Living Colour. The host of Radio X is Sage, and she is fucking hilarious, as she's constantly saying the most outrageous shit going. This line right here is my favourite of hers by far.
You're back on Radio X, I'm Sage, and yes, that is my real name, and if you don't believe me, you can go fuck yourself.
It's hard for me to say which soundtrack I like more between San Andreas and Vice City. They are completely different vibes altogether, so it's difficult to compare, but the one area where San Andreas comes on top is its original theme, and this has to be one of the most iconic theme songs in all of gaming. I'll leave it at that. So, onto the narrative. Earlier we established that Carl Johnson is returning to his home of Los Santos after spending 5 years in Liberty City. We soon learn from CJ's brother Sweet that their mother was recently killed. Before he reaches home, CJ is intercepted by Crash, the Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums, based on a real-life specialized unit of the Los Angeles Police Department with the same name that no longer exists. Crash is led by Officer Frank Tenpenny, an absolute prick who's still a very entertaining character, and voiced by Samuel L. Jackson, as well as his fellow officers Eddie Pulaski and Jimmy Hernandez. They're supposed to be reducing the level of gang crime in the city, but in actuality they are extremely corrupt, and don't hesitate to carry out acts of police brutality, intimidation, and evidence planting. They explain to CJ that he will now start working for them, or else they will frame him for killing a police officer. CJ meets up with his brother Sweet, his sister Kendall, and his old friends Big Smoke and Ryder, all of which belong to the Grove Street family street gang, with Sweet acting as the leader. Grove Street Families is one of the oldest street gangs in Los Santos, but during CJ's absence they've lost a lot of their influence and territories to other street gangs, including their sworn enemies, the Ballers, as well as two Mexican gangs, the Vagos and the Aztecas. This is due to high-ranking members dying and the Grove Street families themselves being split up into different factions, causing inter-hostilities. Another big problem is their refusal to enter the drugs trade, specifically crack cocaine, which has placed them at a severe disadvantage to gangs like the Ballers, who have profited from it significantly. Crack cocaine is also spreading throughout their territory, turning their members into hopeless junkies. CJ decides to stick around and help the gang resolve their problems. The impact of crack cocaine is an extremely prominent aspect of this story. We see firsthand how harmful hard drugs are to people and communities, and the game never shies away from it. It's a portrayal of the crack epidemic in the United States in the 1980s and early 1990s. San Andreas takes a hard anti-drug stance from beginning to end, and you could say it doesn't get enough credit for that. Most of the early game missions involve attempting to decrease the influence of crack cocaine in Grove Street territories, and we are explicitly shown that everyone who succumbs to it suffers. At this point, it's clear that there is much more world building in this game compared to its predecessors. A lot of time is spent establishing the state of the gang and Los Santos, and it's rather compelling. As CJ completes missions with his old gang, we learn some interesting details. Apparently CJ's mother was murdered in a drive-by shooting, with some people witnessing Ballers in a green Sabre doing the work. We also see that Big Smoke has moved out of Grove Street and into Ballers territory, after supposedly getting money from his aunt. Crash are often seen at both Ryder and Big Smoke's house, but we don't get full information on what they are doing there. During this time, CJ befriends a member of the Aztecas gang called Caesar, who is Kendall's boyfriend, and does work for this guy OG Loke, who's a dreadfully bad rapper trying desperately to get into the music industry.
Hey, it's OG Loke, homie, and I'ma kick a little something like this. Hey, yo, when I come through up in the place, you don't want me to come with a gun in your face. I spit it hotter than anybody in the world could do.
That
it's
shit
like
sucks. Damn.
CJ and the crew make regular hits on the Ballers, who retaliate by attacking the Grove Street families frequently. This is where the whole gang territory system comes into play. In this game, parts of the map are highlighted in colors which represent whichever gang holds dominion there. By entering that territory and killing enemy gang members, you can start a gang war, where you have to take down 3 waves of enemies. If you're successful, Grove Street will take control of that area, earning you respect. Through CJ's efforts, the Ballers become severely weakened, and Sweet decides to ambush a major group of them under an intersection. Before this happens, however, CJ gets a call from Caesar, who urges CJ to meet him as soon as possible. And this is where the big reveal happens. The two witness both Big Smoke and Ryder with Crash and some Ballers. They also spot the green Sabre. Smoke and Ryder have sold out Grove Street to the Ballers, are working with Crash, and must have been the ones who organized the drive-by killing of his mother in an attempt to take out Sweet. Let me tell you, this was such a shocking moment when this game first came out. Ryder I never cared for, but Smoke's betrayal was particularly upsetting, as he's one of the few guys who comforts and encourages CJ. He's depicted as a cheerful and humorous character, the most likable of the Grove Street crew, so seeing him betray them is a gut punch. CJ rushes off to help Sweet, realizing that he is walking into a trap, but the police soon arrive and they are all arrested. He's taken to a place outside of Los Santos called Whetstone, where Crash warns him not to return to his home, or else Sweet will suffer in prison. This is another memorable moment in this game, as it's where you start to fully grasp just how massive this world is. Now from this point the story kind of loses a bit of impetus. CJ continues to work for Crash so their corruption is kept from going public, but since he can't return to Los Santos, he eventually starts focusing on earning money to support himself, Kendall, and Caesar. He encounters a bunch of different people along the way, including Catalina from GTA 3, who is batshit insane here, as well as Claude, who makes a cameo appearance. There's also this elderly hippie named The Truth, who turns out to be a very entertaining character. You perform one of the most famous missions in the GTA series with him, where you burn down his cannabis plantation. By engaging in illegal street racing, CJ wins the deed to a garage in San Fierro, so he invites Caesar, Kendall, and the Truth over there to transform it into a profitable business. Along the way, he meets the leader of a subsection of the San Fierro Triads, a guy named Woozy, and starts working for him in the city, eventually earning his full trust. At one point, CJ learns of the Loco Syndicate, an organization supplying drugs to Smoke, Ryder, and the Ballers, which is headed by one Mike Torino, this guy T-Bone Mendez, and a pimp named Jizzy B. CJ infiltrates the syndicate by working for Jizzy B, and after earning his trust, kills him. CJ eventually kills Mike Torino as well, and then learns of the Syndicate's next meeting with the Ballers, which he ambushes with Caesar and the Triads, killing both Mendez and Ryder in the process. Sometime later, CJ receives a phone call from a man with a digitally distorted voice who turns out to be Mike Torino. Apparently he wasn't killed, and explains that he is an undercover government agent. He demands CJ assist him with various shady operations in exchange for Sweet's freedom. Afterwards, CJ travels to Las Venturas to help Woozy open a casino there. Once again, he encounters a bunch of colorful characters, including Kent Paul and Ken Rosenberg from Vice City, as well as a young Salvatore Leone from GTA 3. CJ starts working for them, but acts as a sort of double agent for Woozy, so he can earn Salvatore's trust before eventually robbing his casino. There's a famous mission here where you fly back to Liberty City and take out one of the Forelli family members. This was such an amazing moment back in the day, and remains one of the most memorable missions in the game. CJ continues to work for Crash until Tenpenny betrays him and orders Pulaski to kill both him and Hernandez. CJ turns the tables on Pulaski and eventually kills him, which feels great as the man is a complete knob throughout the game. After robbing the Caligula's casino, Woozy's casino has become a success, but CJ finds the task of running it boring. He saves the life of Mad Dog, a rapper who fell to depression after CJ unwillingly destroyed his career whilst helping OG Loke, and together they return to Los Santos and take back his mansion, all while CJ becomes his manager. Torino eventually honors his promise and has Sweet released from prison. CJ goes to pick him up and tries to impress him with talk of his business ventures, but Sweet berates him for turning his back on the gang. Together they work to re-establish the Grove Street families and weaken the Ballers. Meanwhile, Tenpenny is arrested and put on trial for several charges, but is acquitted due to lack of evidence, leading to a citywide riot that mirrors the 1992 Los Angeles riots. Pandemonium hits the streets, and you can see the chaos out in the world yourself. It's a nice detail. Now, kind of similar to Vice City's final act, this is where you have to retake territory from rival gangs and earn a certain level of respect before the final mission becomes available. Thankfully, it's nowhere near as arduous as that game and doesn't take too long at all. Sweet soon learns of Big Smoke's location, a sort of crack fortress in East Los Santos, and together they go to take him down. CJ puts all the responsibility on himself and enters the place alone. This is one of the hardest missions in the game. It's basically a gauntlet run where you climb the building whilst fending off wave after wave of enemies until you reach Smoke himself, and then you must descend the building whilst dealing with fire and even more enemies. CJ tries to reason with Smoke, but it ends in a gunfight, and this guy is a bullet sponge like nothing else. You have to shower him with gunfire to take him down. His final words reveal that he betrayed the gang after getting caught up in money and power, showing a bit of remorse for his actions before succumbing to his injuries. And this is where Tenpenny shows up, who's arrived to claim his share of Smoke's crack money and kill CJ. Tenpenny flees the scene after failing to deal CJ the final blow, so CJ and Sweet chase him down. Tenpenny soon loses control of his vehicle and crashes off the bridge over Grove Street. CJ wants to deal the final blow, but is stopped by his family, and Tenpenny finally dies, bringing the riots to an end. Sometime later, CJ, Sweet, Kendall, and Caesar are seen discussing what the future holds, when they're interrupted by Mad Dog, Ken Rosenberg, Kent Paul. The whole crew is here. Mad Dog shows off his first gold record, and the family begin to celebrate. CJ heads outside to see what's happening around the block, ending the game. Okay, so this is clearly an ambitious story. It's much longer, intricate, and far more convoluted than any other game in the series so far. Unsurprisingly, this is both a good and bad thing. Let's start with the positives. Firstly, the characterization is top-notch. CJ is an extremely likable protagonist. I personally think he is a better one than both Tommy and Claude for a few reasons, the biggest of which being he's a lot more down to earth. CJ is not a hardened criminal, he's just a guy from the hood who gets caught up in some bad business. Sure, he has no problem hunting down or wiping out those who get in his way, but he generally displays a lot more decency. He shows genuine remorse after killing both Ryder and Big Smoke, and occasionally gives characters a chance to redeem themselves, like when he confronts Pulaski. He also experiences actual character development. After being forced to leave Los Santos, CJ tries to better himself by letting go of his gang-based mentality, adopting a more strategic and intelligent approach. He's young and naive, yes, but by the time you reach Las Venturas, he starts handling situations like a professional. It's a very clear growth in his character. He has a lot of redeeming qualities, and ultimately just wants the best for those close to him, making him the most relatable protagonist by far. Unlike Sonny Forelli, Tenpenny is a constant figure here, following CJ everywhere throughout the game, and repeatedly reminding him who is in charge. The man is a massive prick, but so entertaining, due in large part to the performance of Samuel L. Jackson, which I cannot praise enough. It really is great. Tenpenny definitely ranks amongst the series' most memorable antagonists. Smoke's betrayal leaves such a bad taste in your mouth, because in the short time you're together you grow to appreciate his laid-back demeanor and sense of humor. There are some clues that something is not right with him though, like how he moves out of Grove Street onto Ballas territory, seeing Crash at his place a few times, how he doesn't shoot the Ballers at the drive-thru and all that. It's interesting stuff to pick up on when you replay the game. I have to say though, after the Green Saber cutscene, Big Smoke never shows up again until the very last mission, and it feels a bit off. Caesar ends up being one of the few people who has your back from beginning to end, and it's quite unexpected, so he ends up being memorable. I enjoyed every encounter with The Truth and Mike Torino as well. It certainly isn't all good though. I mean, this guy Macca who suffers from compulsive masturbation? Was this really needed? I assume he's just here for some comic relief, but Christ, guys. I also think Ryder needed to be fleshed out more. Apparently there were issues with his voice actor or something, which is why we don't get much info on him, but I cannot confirm that. Either way, the whole situation with Ryder betraying the gang barely gets any acknowledgement and sort of fizzles out as well. San Andreas' narrative is long, and a lot of time is dedicated to setting the scene in Los Santos with the drug problem and the gang wars, etc., but that stuff is kind of pushed to the side after you arrive in Whetstone. There are some missions in San Fierro that link back to it at least, but Las Venturas feels like one big side area where you're doing stuff that doesn't connect much with what was established in Los Santos. CJ experiences a slow growth during that time, and I appreciate that, but it feels like the wider story loses some focus and momentum around the mid-game. San Fierro and Las Venturas don't receive the same level of world building that Los Santos does either, which I guess makes sense, but it is noticeable how lacking they feel in this department, comparatively speaking. It is an enjoyable journey all in all, but some parts are stronger than others, which was always going to be the case with how vast it is. Still, San Andreas manages to ride the line between the utmost seriousness when portraying heavy themes, alongside the usual crazy humor and over-the-top antics you have come to expect from this franchise. There are times when they clash quite jarringly. The game can go from one extreme to the other in the blink of an eye, but it never shies away from addressing very weighty social issues, and I think that is commendable. At the time of its release, San Andreas was undeniably special. It resonated with millions and would go on to become a cultural phenomenon, spawning memes and myths, all of which helped elevate it to legendary heights. The scale and scope of its world was and still is dazzling. It feels like it's constantly surprising you with fine details and unexpected content from beginning to end. Today, it is showing some age, as you'd expect from a 2004 title, but I still found it to be a fairly comfortable experience overall. This game tries to do an awful lot with its narrative, and the results are a little mixed, I'd say, but the cast of characters combined with the outrageous missions in its second half are very memorable, and the good outweighs the bad in most cases. San Andreas would act as the benchmark for the series going forward, and there are many people who still regard it as the best GTA game ever made. I'm not entirely sure if I agree with that sentiment personally, but it's easy to see why so many hold that view. The GTA Trilogy remains some of the most influential games in the industry. Nowadays it's a bit difficult to appreciate just how important they were for pioneering open world design and maturity in video games, especially GTA 3. That's a title that changed the face of gaming, and that's not an exaggeration either. The freedom it brought had never been done before on the same level, and as I said in the intro, that freedom would ultimately go on to become the defining hallmark of the entire franchise. You have to remember that back in 2001, games were mostly linear, taking a level-based approach to gameplay, but GTA 3 gave players the choice to do as they please. It was unprecedented at the time. Other developers would take that concept and build on it, spawning countless games that we have come to know and love. Despite being greatly oversaturated in today's environment, open worlds remain one of my favorite design philosophies. I would not exactly say that these games have stood the test of time or anything. GTA 3 in particular has not aged well, but Vice City and San Andreas are mostly playable if a little dated in many aspects. If I had to choose which one I enjoyed the most, I would give it to Vice City. It's easily the most accessible of the original trilogy, and positively oozes style. San Andreas is a marvel, and has the best missions by far. There's still loads of good to it, but Vice City was just a bit more consistently enjoyable this time. I gotta say, it was really fun replaying these titles, but I would not recommend playing all three back to back. It was a great time, don't get me wrong, but I could feel the fatigue setting in towards the end of it all. As such, I'm going to take a little break before moving on to GTA 4 and 5, just so I can clear my head a bit. There will be another video in the meantime. Anyway, that's going to be all from me, guys. Thank you for watching.